Welcome back to the Trending Communicator. I'm your host, Dan Nestle. Authentic might be the most abused word in business right now. Every AI tool promises to preserve your authentic voice, and every leadership guru peddles authenticity as a brand pillar. And the more people say it, the less it means. It's become a buzzword pretending to be a virtue. And we can talk about that at another time. But I think authenticity needs to be re-examined. But what would it mean if someone actually understood voice as a physical instrument, not a metaphor, trained over years to project truth into a room of 35,000 people without a microphone? Well, my guest today made that exact pivot from the opera stage to the boardrooms and government chambers where communication failures crater careers and derail policy. She built a global communication training company, ran it for 2 decades, then deliberately downsized to work exclusively with senior leaders in their highest stakes moments. Prime ministers, cabinet members, Fortune 100 executives, all learning what it takes to build trust through how you speak. Her first book became a Washington Post bestseller, and she'd been studying technology and communication for 8 years before generative AI even made the headlines, not as what she calls the AI nouveau riche, jumping on the bandwagon. She wrote the book on using AI without losing yourself, and she wrote it because none of her clients were asking about it, and she knew that was a problem. Well, we're going to dig deep into what authentic leadership communication looks like when AI can draft your speech in seconds, and why live speaking might be the last place we know of for certain that a human can actually be human. She's the founder and CEO of Global Public Speaking, a Harvard Kennedy School lecturer for over a decade, a regular HBR contributor, and author of AI for the Authentic Leader: How to Communicate More Effectively Without Losing Your Humanity. She's also trained women leaders across 24 countries through Vital Voices, which tells you something about how seriously she takes the idea that voice is power. I have a feeling she might just convince this skeptic that authenticity still actually means something. So please welcome, for the first time on the Trending Communicator, Allison Shapira. Allison, how you doing? It's good to see you.
It's so great to be with you. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, it's good to be here. And, sometimes, I meet people in the craziest of places and have them on the show, or, people reach out to me. But rarely do I, work with agencies who send me pitches and pitches and pitches all the time. But when I saw your name come through and I saw the information, like who you are and what you do, I said, this has to be on the Trending Communicator. And I'm really, really glad for that. So folks out there, do not give up on podcast pitching. It works. It works. And Allison is absolutely proof of that. But I'm so glad that we were connected, and I'm glad that we had time to talk, a while ago. So I got to know you. And I'm really excited about talking with you about this corner of communications that, we often don't get to on the show. We did on the very first episode of the Trending Communicator with Matt Abrams when we talked about, verbal communication. We talked about speaking. We talked about impromptu speaking, especially. But you have a very different or more nuanced approach, and especially now in the age of AI, I want to hear more about what it means to be an effective verbal communicator in this crazy time when AI is, as I said, writing our speeches, deep faking your faces, and who knows where it's going to be tomorrow or the next week. So that's enough of a preamble. Welcome to the show. And I really want to hear more about, hear all about you first, and then we can get into it. So how did you get here? Like what was that opera to PR, to communication expert? How is that journey? And, it's just fascinating to me.
Growing up, all I wanted to do was be an opera singer. I performed in high school. I studied abroad in Italy. And I remember when I was applying for college, I was applying to be a vocal performance major. And I remember my father saying, don't you want to study something practical like economics or business as a minor? And I thought, no, I just want to be an opera singer. And then when I got into the field seriously, I realized how political it was and
Wow.
how in order to get ahead, it really depends not on anything you can control. It depends on how somebody else likes your voice. And I didn't want to be in a field where I couldn't use my brains and my work ethic to get ahead. I had to rely on others. So I wound up leaving opera, and my first job outside of the field of opera was in diplomacy, where I had to write and deliver speeches on international policy. I was in my early 20s. I'd never given a speech before. I had no idea what speaking was. So I went to Toastmasters, and actually through
Oh,
learning through Toastmasters, I realized I already knew public speaking because opera singers learn how to calm their nerves, project their voice, and how to connect emotionally with their audience. Now, they don't know how to craft a persuasive message because opera singers don't write and deliver their own material. So that was a bit of a learning curve. But once I made that switch, I actually realized I had exactly the skills that I needed to be not just a powerful speaker myself, but a powerful guide of other communicators. And that's how I launched my business.
that's incredible. And in fact, like the one thing that sticks in my mind about this is, I mean, the one thing for crying out loud, we're going opera to diplomacy, but you landed a role like writing for essentially PR, doing speech writing from a vocal background, vocal music background. What was it in your interview, in your job interview at that time, or in the resume that you had that got you that role? Because, I mean, that's a secret I think everybody needs to know.
That's right. Certainly now, as a lot of people are looking for jobs, a lot of liberal arts majors looking for jobs, it's really tough out there. Even if you don't have a liberal arts major, for an
Mhm.
engineering major, it's tough. And so I've always been interested in foreign languages and foreign cultures. And so in college, I actually interned at a number of different diplomatic missions in Boston.
Oh,
And so I was already in that environment. And one of them happened to be hiring for it wasn't public relations, we call it public diplomacy
sure.
in the diplomatic world. And so one of them was hiring for that role. I interviewed and I sent a photo of myself at the annual party with the rest of the team. And it turns out the consul general, the head diplomat, actually had that same photo on his
Oh,
desk. So I was already in his office when I interviewed, and that turned out to be very helpful because he already knew me.
that's a great thing. People struggling with applicant tracking systems these days don't have a hope in hell of that happening with them. But that's why you have to maintain your network, make sure that you look at all of the skills and all the things you've done in the past if you're early job seeking. But this is not a job seeking podcast. This is about communications. Sorry, it's really fascinating that is not a common journey, I think, by any stretch. But you got into diplomacy, you know, and started the public speaking business, started your own business shortly thereafter. And from there, like, how did you build your IP? Like, how did you kind of come to this idea that, you know, well, people needed a framework and they needed to have like proper training and what about your diplomatic communications work made that clear to you?
My diplomatic communications work taught me a lot about, first of all, what not to do, because I made a lot of mistakes, and also how to keep your cool under fire. Because
Mm,
in diplomacy, you're talking to audiences, some of whom agree with you, some of whom don't, some of whom are protesting outside of the event you're speaking at. So it was a very contentious field in which to be speaking, and also at a very young age. So
mm.
I learned how to address a hostile audience, how to prepare for tough questions, how to handle those tough questions when they came in. And so I was learning those skills. I didn't have a framework, though. It
Mm.
wasn't until years later, and I'll never forget, I was doing a training for the American Chamber of Commerce in Israel, and I was leading a training, and a friend of mine was in the training. And afterwards, she said to me, Allison, you need to give us a methodology. Like, what are the three things to do before you write a speech? And what are the three things you should do during the speech itself? And she really said it in kind of an offhand tone. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. what are the 3 things you should do before a speech? Okay. And I came up with that. And then what should you do during the speech? And I just used that as my framework. And for many, many years, my framework was the 3 questions to write and then the 3 movements that you make every time you deliver a speech. And it took something as simple as one confused friend who was willing to give me feedback that helped me
Mm-hmm.
understand that I needed to build out a methodology. And now I have dozens of frameworks and many different tools that comprise my own methodology. And every time I talk to a client or I'm debriefing an event, my mind is still creating new frameworks and new tools as I continually think of new ways to do more and to be better.
Which of your frameworks would you pick to say have really stood the test of time? I actually want to know what the 3 questions to write are and what the 3 movements are myself. But
Okay, first, the 3 questions are, who's your audience? What's your goal? Which, as you know, are very obvious in our field. But the 3rd question is, why you? Which
mm-hmm.
doesn't mean why are you qualified or where did you go to school? Why you means why do you care about the work you do and the people you represent? And when was a moment in your life that made you care? And that 2-part question is what I ask in order to help people uncover their authentic voice that
Mm-hmm.
may have been hidden by their circumstances or by their upbringing or by the environment in which they work. So those are the 3 questions everyone should ask before they craft a message. 3 movements being with your eyes, your body, and with your tone of voice. So that's one methodology. What has really stood the test of time, which is not to say that that one has not. What I'll tell you, what I'm teaching the most now is my ACE model of leadership communication, recognizing that after 24 years of teaching leaders how to build trust and influence through their communication, I keep coming back to authenticity, clarity, and energy as 3 core competencies every leader needs to be effective when they build trust using their voice. And it doesn't matter what level they're at, what industry, or what country they live in, because I've trained this methodology all around the world in different languages. And we keep coming back to those 3 competencies.
It doesn't even matter if you're talking about public speaking at that point, right? You need to be authentic and you need to be clear. And people can sense energy even in writing. Like they can sense,
of course,
bad juju when bad juju happens. They get it, and they know when you're off your base, or when you're trying to hide something based a lot on your energy.
That's right, which is why it's so important to pick up the phone every time you get a difficult email, as opposed to just going back and forth where the energy can get out of hand. Let's jump on the phone. Let's use some breathing techniques in order to ensure our voice de-escalates the situation. So the energy in our voice is crucial. And I define public speaking as any time you speak with one person or more. So it's really how do leaders communicate in every situation, meetings, pitches, presentations, and certainly more formal speeches, but every day they're using their voice in the act of leadership.
I feel like the idea of picking up the phone after an email or text nowadays is completely lost on most of us. And this is one of those cobbler's shoes moments where I always say you should just pick up the phone if you're feeling emotional, especially to pick up the phone, but I rarely do. I go right back on the email. But I've learned to pause. I had a wonderful psychiatrist and even several podcast guests have even said that their secret to really taking stock of the moment and communicating well is to not let your mouth outpace your brain and take a pause, just chill. Speak what your teachers used to say, speak before you think, Nestle, like that kind of thing.
Or think before you speak.
Or think before you speak. See, I did it right there.
Which was probably the opposite was the problem.
The opposite was the problem. Because we do in our world, especially when you have so many things, and when I say our world, I mean our communications and marketing world, where various problems, crises, tasks are just thrown at you because you're not, and with no disrespect at all to accountants, if you have a finance problem, you go to the accountant. it's a fairly defined realm. You have the legal problem, you go to the lawyer. But the marketer and the communicator tend to have these kind of fluffy borders around the things that they do. They tend to have, some people blame them for being siloed, but it's anything but. I think they're in a very osmotic membrane around them where just things keep kind of flowing back and forth. So you're catching all these things. When do you have time to pause your brain? Like, what is it that we can do to just really breathe and pause? We forget all the time. And might be even worse when you're on stage in front of people or have that nervousness going.
It certainly is. And people think that they can't pause when they're in the moment in a tough situation. And we call that the negotiator's pause. Before you agree to terms or before you say that statement that you're thinking but not sure you should say out loud, or that you're thinking but you don't know if you should say it out loud, pause and breathe is the term that I use with my clients again and again. Pause and breathe so that the filler words like and don't come out, so that you don't react with emotion, so that you don't say the wrong thing that then becomes what's reported in the press, because every word is now under the microscope. So it's something that we have to build, this muscle that we have to build. And that's, as leaders, how do we lead ourselves? How do we self-regulate? Pause and breathe is one of the ways in which we do it. And I will say, I'm not always the best at it either. I struggle with it myself. I get impulsive in how I want to act. And I need to remind myself, and my mother will often remind me, I'm in my 40s, she'll still remind me, Allison, pause and breathe. And so I still have her voice in my head.
I'm just laughing because I think we don't have the same mother, but I find myself saying that to my mom all the time. Mom,
that's
pause.
Interesting.
Pause. Relax. And now that that I'm working by myself most of the time, since I went out on my own, I find myself like I certainly am lonely sometimes. I don't have people around, and I feel I miss camaraderie and I miss discussion. But I feel like it's had a little bit of an effect when I do get myself into social situations. I've forgotten how to pause. I'm so excited to be there, that I've lost some of the, I wouldn't call them niceties because I'm still nice and wonderful to people, but really it's more about like manners and etiquette that kind of started to, I don't know, people talk about cognitive loss or cognitive delegation when you're talking about AI, but I think we forget about behavioral loss, behavioral delegation, and I feel like we need to have frameworks like yours, books like yours. We need to be listening to people like you to just remember, okay, we have to actually talk to people. We have to actually be in front of people.
We should talk to people. We don't always think that we have to talk to people, because as AI becomes easier and easier to talk to, and more patient and more empathetic and always available, it starts to undermine the human connection that we relied on. So that's, I'm a huge proponent of the power of AI to amplify our authenticity. There's also great risk in destroying human connection at the same time.
For sure. Which now let's talk about authenticity, because I made so much of it in the intro and I've been meaning to get there. I've had my doubts about authenticity because I think it means different things to different people. And I had a guest a long time ago on the previous iteration of the show who talked about the difference between authenticity and sincerity, and the importance of being genuine versus being authentic. These things, and
how
it's
do you
interesting
define that?
Yeah, it's like that, and that's what I was thinking. This is a strange thing, or I've never heard this before, and I believe it was more about like sincerity is deed based, and authenticity tends to be more belief based or verbal. I don't know if this is his framework, not mine, but again, it's another indication that we're talking, we might be saying, using the same words, but we're speaking different languages. So what is authenticity? Let's start there. Tell us about authenticity, what it means to you and how you're defining it in your book. And then we'll get into, well, what does that mean when it comes to AI?
Everyone has a different definition of authenticity, which is why people love to hate it as a buzzword, because they interpret it through their own lens of how they see the world. And when people tell you to be authentic, sometimes they think, well, not that kind of authenticity. Like you can be authentically lazy or authentically unprepared. And I like to joke in my keynote speeches, I'm authentically an assertive driver. And that doesn't mean that that's an effective leadership quality when I get impatient with my team or with partners. So I talk about authenticity in a few ways. First of all, I talk about strategic authenticity. So if you think about a Venn diagram, in one circle, you have what's authentic to you. In the other circle, you have what's effective in any given situation. What's effective with a particular client, what's effective in a particular country or industry. And your job is to find that overlap between what is authentic to you. You're not making it up, you're not faking it, you're simply strategically choosing the parts of you that are authentic, which you believe will make you effective in this situation. Mm-hmm. That's how I look at that strategic authenticity. How do I define authenticity? I define it as speaking and acting in alignment with your values and beliefs. So it's not just rolling out of bed, not brushing your teeth, and that's authentic to you. That does not fall into the strategic authenticity overlap. Yeah. It's what are your values and beliefs, and in which ways are you living and speaking those values and beliefs in any given situation.
And, people aren't stupid. Like we have this innate sense of when that's not in alignment. You can call it a bullshit detector, you can call it whatever you want, but we have, as people, as humans, when we may have, there's another thing AI might be taking away from us. We're losing this sense of reading body language, reading faces, understanding the aura in a way to know when somebody's not being true to themselves.
That's right.
It's interesting because I appreciate the idea, and I'm going to actually think about this more of strategic authenticity. I mean, for business, that makes sense. And look, it's a Venn diagram. I get it. I get the sense also that a lot of leaders and a lot of people who are in the public eye might have a little different definition of what strategic even means when it comes to strategic authenticity, right? It's what is right in the moment, what they can say in the moment that sounds like they're being real and true to satisfy others, which is the opposite of authenticity.
Correct.
And it's easy to kind of get caught up in this when you're two steps removed or one step removed even from where those values are coming from. And what I mean by that is put yourself in the role, and you are in this role, and you've been in this role where you're counseling people who are spokespersons, executives, et cetera, for a company. And the company has values. The company has ethics. We hope you share those. The company has values, and it has its own, mores. And a lot of Japanese companies I've worked for have creeds. They have a 150-year-old creed that hangs on the wall, and they've updated them to be values and vision and stuff. But same thing. Let's just say, for argument's sake. But what if that's not you, right? What if that is not your inner compass points in a different direction? Communicators, I find, either you're sacrificing or dampening your own moral or, let's say, authentic kind of thoughts in favor of a company or in favor of the person, in order to serve. And their leader may be rudderless because they're not anchored to a set of values that they actually believe in. So how do we work in that?
It's a interesting
tricky.
question to raise because there are a few options. When I work with investment bankers, for instance, I used to start by saying, what are you passionate about? And the investment bankers would look at me and they'd be like, are you kidding?
Money.
We're not passionate about investment banking. We're proud of what we do. We love solving problems for our clients. We like putting the puzzle pieces together, but I wouldn't say we're passionate about it. So I had to learn what language would resonate with them. And when we can't talk about in what ways are you living your sense of purpose, let's talk about what are you proud of in the work that you do. So maybe you don't share the exact values of the organization, but you need the job. Let's talk about what makes you proud. Is it the impact that you have on your team, how you live your values for your team or for your clients? That can make it a lot easier. For some leaders, once they realize their values are not in alignment with the values of their organization, they leave
Yeah, for
because
sure.
it's holding them back. It's making them unhappy. And as a result, an unhappy leader is not going to treat their team well, which is going to affect morale and retention and productivity. So it may become a mismatch if the leader lets themselves find that discrepancy. So it really depends on which values we're talking about and
For sure.
how far away the leader is from the values of their organization.
Yeah. It's just you get the sense in this where things are fluid these days. I mean, and when I say these days, I don't mean right now. I mean, let's say the last 5 years or 10 years. It's this volatility where societal issues demand responses, or they feel like they demand responses, but they don't always demand responses. It's tempting to move the goalposts a little bit about where your values are, so that you can kind of take advantage of, or at least defend against what's happening in the moment. And if we would, if you could find that one piece that you can anchor yourself to in a situation, it's hard to do, right? I mean, it's very difficult. And I think a lot of folks don't understand how much of I think, not only burden, but responsibility that is for the person who is counseling, for the communicator or the marketer, saying, hey, we can't say that, or we can say that, or, look, you don't, when you get up in front of these people, you have to blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
It's hard. It is hard for the communication professional to do that. It's also up to the communication professional to help bridge the gap between the leader and the message that needs to be delivered. So meeting with the principal, meeting with the leader they're supporting to get a better sense of that person's values. So then the communication professional can go ahead and craft messages that bridge the leader's values and stories with the values of the organization. And a lot of times when I'm working with senior executives who have communication teams writing for them, what I tell them is, you have to give the comms team your time if you want them to write something you'll actually like.
Yeah.
You can't just expect them to get it right without ever having spoken to you. So there's a responsibility the leader has in order to give the comms people that time. And then on the comms side, they have a responsibility to help bridge the gap. Otherwise, the communication is going to be ineffective and inauthentic.
For sure. And we see it all the time, and now especially that people can just create messaging and keywords, key messages and Q&A and speeches and everything with pick your poison, pick your tool, pick your friend of mine just called them teammates. She likes to call AI agents teammates. Pick your teammate. If there's an authenticity gap in what somebody is saying and what the company is all about, AI can really either fill that gap or exacerbate it. So digging into your fundamental ideas about what we need to watch out for and how AI can either enhance or really destroy authenticity. I don't even know where to start. How do you recommend that we work with AI to kind of keep authenticity right in the front?
let's start with what's not working, because the
Yeah.
reason I teach authenticity or teach leaders how to bring out their authenticity is because I believe authenticity builds trust and trust leads to results. So that's why I focus on authenticity, recognizing it as a driver of trust. What's not working right now is that leaders are using generative AI in ways that reduce trust. They're using AI to craft a message and then sending that message without oversight or review. And then their employees are getting this message thinking, you didn't write this. My performance review has never looked like this. Do you really believe it? And we're seeing new research come out now, because this is not like Aristotle's 3 modes of persuasion that we have time tested for 2,000 years. We have 2 to 3 years of uses to test. And so we're writing the new rules of communication right now. And what we're seeing as we do research is, and there was a fascinating study last year, that when supervisors over-relied on AI for routine communication, their subordinates viewed them as less caring, less knowledgeable, less sincere.
Surprise.
And if that's
Right.
what they're thinking, they're not going to trust their supervisors. And also those subordinates, they judge their supervisors more harshly for the same AI use. So it also means we're seeing a double standard in how we use AI and how we acknowledge the validity of others' use of it. And at the same time, we're mistrusting it when we can see the AI. Now, I will tell you, I believe that's a temporary phenomenon. In 2 years, nobody's going to ask if you used AI to write a message, because of course you did. But it will be a better AI tool. It will be more customized to you. It will be more effective. Just like we all use spell check, because it would be rude not to use spell check. It would be rude to ask a human for feedback when you haven't asked an AI first, because it would be a waste of the human's time. Now that's
Interesting.
forward thinking in terms of communication. Right now, what I'm advising leaders and communicators in every field to do is to make sure that when they use AI, the first draft starts with you. You're not outsourcing the first draft. It comes from your brain, and then you bring in the AI as a brainstorm partner, as a feedback partner if you use the voice mode to role play, but you come back in throughout that process. And I call it the AI authenticity loop, so that you're using AI in ways that bring out your authentic voice, teaching the AI your values so that it can reflect them back to you or show you where they're lacking in your messages. This is not about keeping the human in the loop. As I say in my book, the human is the loop.
I want to get you speaking with Ethan Malik, because you're both right.
I would love that. I've reached out to
I
him.
would
He
too.
doesn't respond.
Same.
He's a
But
busy
like
guy.
but you've got HBR and Harvard under your belt, and you figured he would say hi. But
You figure.
Ethan, if you happen to hear this, you know where I
Call
live. Call me. But no, seriously, like, his whole idea of even though it's not necessarily I don't know if he originated or coined it, and he may have, but keeping the human in the loop is common sense when you're dealing with something that is, you're staking your reputation on, or you're staking your company's brand on, or even a simple message. You'd think it's common sense, yeah, and yet people do pass things off through sheer laziness, or because they trust the AI to know more than they do, in which case they're not in the right business. But the whole idea of like keeping being like the human is the loop. I've been doing more and more work with helping leaders to write authentically and to maintain their real true DNA, let's say, their brand DNA and their voice DNA in their writing with AI. And just to get to the point where you're able to do that is a lot of work. And folks don't understand. Like, they think, well, I thought AI was supposed to make this easier. I thought I could just go on there and make stuff happen. Well, that's why we get slop. That's why we get the stuff that's not authentic. Believe it or not, you said the human is the loop. I would add that the human is the loop. The human knowledge is what the loop goes around. It's fueling the movement around the loop. Like the knowledge that you have, the things that you've done, the things that you've said are yours. They're 100% yours. What's more authentic than something you've already done and already said?
Well, I'll push back on that. Are they yours, or are they ideas that you picked up from others along the way?
Well, we're
Maybe a
talking about
book
an
you
ethical
read.
problem now. Yeah, for
But
sure.
what are humans? What is our knowledge if not the sum total of what we've ingested through reading, learning, and studying? Isn't that what AI has done? It's ingested, it's learned, it's studied, and now it's generating text based on its training data. Our training data is our entire lives. How are we different?
True. Maybe the difference is in the system prompt, so to speak. When AI is interpreting or going use whatever the lens is that AI is using to interpret or to provide the answers that you're seeking, whether it's a simple answer or whether it's a 2,000 word HBR piece, it's going through its own training, its own what's it called for people? It's your behavioral system, your oh gosh, the term just fled my mind. It was right there on the tip of my tongue. But essentially you're programming, right? And yeah, you're raised with your own biases and you're raised with your own thoughts about the world, and they have to, and they do unbidden come out into your writing and into your communication. But that's kind of the spice that makes things authentically you. You have to be able to identify those things, and you have to be able to understand when you're right and wrong, and when there's ethics, and when you're being ethical. But with AI, you're counting on somebody else's idea of what that system behavior, that behavioral system is.
That's right. You're relying on somebody else deciding which values to align the AI system with. Whereas you've already had the priming of your family influences, which determine your values, or your life experiences that determine your values. So I would say you have more ownership of the programming process than an AI tool would have. Now, you don't have full ownership because you don't get to choose your parents, and you don't choose your relatives or your life experiences to a certain extent. But there's more of a sense of agency when it comes to human communication, connection, authenticity than there is in an AI system. So I wanted to push back to play devil's advocate on that thought. I still see the value, of course, in human wisdom, the wisdom of lived experience over the sum total of the combination of human knowledge.
Yeah, that's the next part, right? Is, okay, you have all of this stuff. You have all of the stuff of your life. I mean, if you're a professional and you're a domain expert and you've established your expertise, you've got a lot of stuff out there. You've got your body of work. That's a fairly safe place to be sending your AI to pull out things that are more likely to be authentically you. As long as you're aware of everything you've done and you look at it and say, wait, that's an idea that I had 15 years ago and it's no longer valid. You have to still be on it. You still have to watch it, be careful with it, and how it chooses and how it decides what parts of your past or what parts of your, what ideas of yours or what writing of yours to bring into a specific communication. That's all up to how you set the system prompts and how you program it, right? But to see it really get to the point where it's enhancing authenticity, you need to add a good, healthy dollop of wisdom and experience. And that's where I think we're 100% on the same page. In your case, when you're talking with your clients and you're speaking with leaders, where's the enhancement part? Like, how do you say that AI can enhance your authenticity?
I created an authenticity GPT, and it's actually something that your viewers and listeners can download at my website at allisonshapira.com/AI. There's a resource guide that accompanies the book that has an authenticity GPT. And I created this actually based on the concept of why you, which we talked about earlier. Why you is a question which brings out your authentic voice. So I created a custom chatbot trained on the why you, or grounded in the concept of why you, where leaders can have a chat with that chatbot and it prompts them to go deeper into their experience and helps them generate a why you statement. So that's an example where leaders can use a chatbot to bring out their authentic voice. Now, is it better than the process they would go through with me personally? No. But is it available at 2 a.m. when they can't sleep and I'm asleep and the leader wants to work on their authentic voice, or they're traveling in Malaysia and there's a time difference? That's when it's really effective. So we can have these experiences when a human is not available. Ethan Malik talks about the best available human. And so if the best available human is not available, then an AI tool is very helpful when it prompts you to bring out your own voice. And those are some of the ways in which I think about using AI in a responsible, ethical way that's related to authenticity, is by being intentional about the way in which we're using it to ensure it brings out us at our best, as opposed to flattens our voice and makes us sound like everyone else.
I love that when there's no human around, you got to go to the best source you have. And I'll just go, I need to talk to somebody. I think there's a lot to be said for the power of AI, when you're comfortable and when you get to the point where you're beyond that simple Google-like prompt. And like when you really understand that AI is an iterative and interrogative experience. There's that point where you get into self-reflection, like where AI can send you in these deeper to think more deeply about the things that you may not have considered, and that will result in a more well thought out fill in the blank, well thought out statement, a well thought out idea, whatever it may be. It could also go in the wrong direction. Like it could ask you the wrong questions, which is, I think, I totally agree with you that it's better to talk to Allison than it is to talk to ChatGPT, or somebody who knows you, or somebody who's a professional in this kind of thing. However, lacking that, the power of I almost wanted to say a relationship with AI, but I hate saying that. Like, I think it's just, how do you define yourself with respect to your AI? And then, how do you let it govern your behavior, or how do you govern your behavior with regards to it is a real question a lot of people have. Yeah.
The challenge is that people are outsourcing their critical thinking to AI.
There it is.
They're trusting AI in the way they might blindly trust a human who sounds convincing. And what they're doing is they're removing their own agency, and they're getting themselves into trouble because they don't fact check the AI's work, or they don't push back on what the AI is recommending. And we know at this point in time, it still hallucinates. It still makes up information. So the challenge is not the AI itself. The challenge is lazy humans and their misuse of AI. And we've always had lazy humans. Now it's easier than ever to be lazy. And that's why we need to instill this sense of accountability and responsibility in ourselves, because ultimately we're responsible for the words that come out of our mouth or out of our email address or with our name on them. especially communicators who are putting words in the mouth of their organization. We're responsible for what we share and what gets distributed. So that responsibility or that accountability for what we say and what we get from AI is critical.
We have to think like we have a fiduciary responsibility. Like
Exactly.
words can really damage a company, a brand, a person, more so now than ever before. So, use it at your own risk. But at the same time, there's these mixed messages. People are receiving mixed messages about, they shouldn't have to be using AI. You need to be using AI. Go use AI. But they're not really understanding the purpose of why they're using AI, or, the rationale for why they would use AI to do something that they can do just as easily. And you get disenchanted, or they fail to adopt, or they just don't go anywhere because they're either possibly getting the wrong advice, they're following the wrong strategy, or maybe, just maybe, they simply don't like it and they're not going to use it, right? Which is fine too. A lot of people are like that, and that's their issue.
Well, they're also afraid that it's going to take their job, and that their employer
Right.
is asking them to use AI so that AI can learn what they do, and so then they can be fired. So
Yeah.
it comes back to trust. How are leaders communicating about AI in a way that makes people trust the leader's intention and makes them want to try AI? And what kind of training, what kind of access are we giving to AI? And what I'm finding is a lot of organizations are rolling out AI with technical training as opposed to behavioral training. And that's
right.
leading to the misuse of AI, which is eroding trust.
Yeah, there was a stat recently that I saw that something like 95% or 90 something percent of CEOs had said, yeah, we rolled out AI in our organization. And looking at the performance data, there was mild or moderate performance gains in certain departments for 3 weeks. But then after 3 weeks, everybody, with the exception of maybe 10 or 20% of the employee population, so let's say 80% of the employees are like, to hell with this, I'm not doing this anymore, right? It's not doing it for me. It doesn't help my productivity. It's not doing the things that I want it to do. And yeah, a lot of it's behavioral. A lot of it is trust in where the company wants you to go with this. I think a lot of it has to do with comfort as well. And that's behavioral, right? You need training folks to really to get comfortable with their chosen AI teammate, as Sandy Carter says. How are you going to do work with a teammate that you don't like, or that's uncomfortable, or that you don't like being around? So there's got to be a comfort level, and it's going to vary person to person. But I think authenticity might be at the core of this, because if you see, there's a sort of lead by example thing. If you see people who are using this and still remaining authentic, and they get the gist, then you're more likely to say, maybe I can do that too.
It also has to do with the leaders being willing to be vulnerable in how they're using AI. Because right now, there's a hesitation to share that we're using AI at all, because we think people will judge us, and they are judging us. So it's not false, but it creates an environment where people are afraid to share their AI use, which means no one talks about it, which means no one learns from one another. And we need to normalize AI use in the office by having open conversations about how we're using it, so that we can hear from others if it's working or not. And that's a conversation I think especially communications professionals need to have, because there's a sense of shame around using AI in terms of, well, wait, aren't you good enough by yourself without needing AI? Well, but what if AI could make us better? Let's talk about it. And so that's a challenge of human behavior that I think we need to address.
There's a flip side of that too, which is that the people who are using AI well don't want to tell people that they're using AI well, right? It is making them better. It is helping them to enhance what they're doing, but they're afraid to share. What if the secret gets out? That's a product of the culture that they're in. It's a product of their, of their work environment, the values of their work life, of their company.
That's right.
In the book, And by the way, everybody, the book, AI for the Authentic Leader, you can see it here. I hope it's not reversed on the screen when it
No,
actually
it's
gets
perfect.
shown.
Thank you for showing it.
How to communicate more effectively without losing your humanity. We're kind of scratching the surface of this, but we've been talking about authenticity. We've been talking about how, and I don't think that there's necessarily a straight answer to why and how organizations are failing with AI, or to how they should move forward. Although we all have some ideas about this, but it varies organization to organization, culture to culture, leader to leader. But you've created something in here called the AI Authenticity Loop, and I was hoping that you could kind of walk us through this, because this is the kind of framework that I think if we have in our minds, and if we kind of keep it in the forefront, we can prevent a lot of these issues we're talking about, or actually use AI to enhance.
Right.
So, yeah.
The AI Authenticity Loop is a framework I created when writing the book to give people a tool, a practical guide to using AI in a way that didn't undermine their authenticity. So it has 5 steps. The first step is it starts with you. You come up with the idea. You identify a need that you need to communicate, and you write the first draft. Again, it has to come from your brain so that you can process it and go through the strategic process of deciding what to say, as opposed to letting AI put the words in your mouth.
Sorry,
so it starts with you. Yes.
Can I ask a question at that point? Because
Sure.
there are varying ideas about what starts with you means, right? Or what that draft means.
Okay.
A writer will tell you, or like somebody who's drafting something, like we often do, that no, it means sitting down with the blank paper and writing it. Just write. No help from anything whatsoever. But some folks are saying, isn't a draft an organization of your ideas? So what if you provide all of your ideas, everything that you want the piece to say, and you have a good vision? Like, here's my point of view. Here are the supporting points. Here's what I want to convince audiences of. Here's the context, blah, 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 boom, right? If you write that or kind of jot that into a very extensive prompt, does that count as a draft or not? Like, how does that fit?
It depends. I like the idea of coming up with a bullet pointed list of what you want to say, your ultimate goal, maybe answering the 3 questions, and then a rough outline. That, under my definition, it
Counts.
Starts with you. I do think it's best if you write out the first draft as opposed to just the bullet points, because what I find is when I give those bullet points to AI and ask it to now write this article or this speech based on those bullet points, it starts to add additional context. It uses language or phrases that don't resonate with me, that I don't mean. And then I spend more time reinterpreting the AI's results. And we see this now with all of the data on time saved because of AI use. There was an interesting Workday study from either earlier this year or late last year that said something like 40% of the time saved with AI goes back to reworking the errors and challenges that the AI had produced.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I recommend it starts with you. Yes, it can be the outline as opposed to the language itself. Then you can ask AI for feedback or ideas of how to strengthen the argument. You can ask it to do research on key topics. And then, of course, you have to double check the research that it's responding with. And then the third step is when you look at what the AI has come back with and you evaluate it for authenticity. Does it sound like you? You evaluate it for accuracy. Is it right or is it wrong? So you have to, once you use AI, you have to come back in and apply human judgment. Then the fourth step is using AI for feedback on that message. And if you're actually delivering a presentation, I like to use the voice mode of ChatGPT to role play difficult conversations, to role play speeches. I use a tool called Yoodli, Yoodli, where you can record a speech and get AI-driven feedback. And my version of Yoodli I've trained on my materials. I've grounded it in my books so my clients can get feedback based on my books. AI can provide feedback on an idea, a speech, a message, especially if you give it characteristics of your target audience. Then the fifth and final step is about you, again, delivering your message. It's you in person, it's you virtually, it's you by email, but the message comes from a human and to another human. And then they come up with their own ideas. And the AI authenticity loop starts again.
Yeah. I think, like, going back to the idea of comfort, when you're comfortable with AI, I don't mean in the sense of, hey, I'm comfortable using Word, like, I can use Microsoft Word, I'm comfortable with it. I think when you have that degree of, hey, like, okay, I'm speaking its language now. Like, I have no problem. To me, opening up Claude and just starting to go is as natural as getting my morning cup of coffee. And that says either great or terrible things about me. However, it's just my workday. Like, I have really changed everything about the way that I work and the way that I work through ideas, and stretch the realm of the possible, because I feel comfortable with Claude, right? And I feel comfortable to a degree with other platforms as well. And I use different tools for different reasons. But, Claude's my go-to. That said, when you're talking about the loop, the AI, the authenticity loop, it just makes perfect sense from the point of view of somebody who's totally used to use an AI. Of course, I'm going to start with my own thoughts, and then I want to brainstorm. It just feels right? But I'm going to be in there and like, no, don't do that. You should be doing this. That's not right. We need to rewrite this sentence. Nope, you got it wrong here. Okay, let's take a look. Like, the whole critical back and forth period. That's where the core of, I think, the value of your work comes from, right? I think a lot of people do miss how, like, even experienced folks miss that fourth step, asking for criticism, asking AI to then evaluate your work. It's so good at doing that. It's especially when it has enough context and understands you.
Right.
I can't push that enough. Have you seen this? Have you seen this like in action? Have you seen some great success stories with people who've gone through the loop?
No, that's why I wrote the book, because they weren't using it.
They were.
People ask me, like, what are the best uses you've seen? I'm like, I wrote the book because I didn't see any best use cases. I am seeing people use it and say that they appreciate having that framework. I'll give you an example of that not in action. I was coaching a very senior leader on her communication before an important event. And I always walk them through the 3 questions. And I sat down with her and she said, hey, I already came up with a first draft. I'm like, great, let me see it. And I looked through it and it was abundantly clear that it had been written by AI because of the use of the counter arguments, or there's a certain contrast rhythm that AI really likes to use that now I can't use anymore because it feels like AI has ruined it for me.
All the time.
But it was full of these AI tells. And she admitted when I asked her that she'd used AI, and I said, let's put this aside. And I'm going to ask you 3 questions. And what we came up with, those 3 questions, brought forth rich, authentic language that we then turned into a very powerful speech. What AI wrote her was generic and banal.
Yeah.
And that wasn't going to build trust. The authenticity that we brought out through our process built trust. And that's why I wrote the book, because not enough leaders were using those tools in an appropriate way that would bring out their authentic voice.
I think too many people still see it as a robot assistant that just does things. And, maybe in November of 2022, that would have been a nice thing to do or have, and it was a good party trick. But we're far beyond. What is it? We're not in Kansas anymore.
We are now.
This is a whole different world. I mean, if you spend 15 minutes with Cowork or, with Notebook LM or one of these really advanced, like, amazing platforms that do so many different things, you know, if it doesn't dawn on you that, wait, this isn't just an answer engine, you know, and it gets more powerful with the more stuff I give it, then, you know, you need to spend a little more time with it. This has been amazing, Allison. I find myself thinking more about authenticity. And I try to you can never guarantee that AI is, you can never say this will be authentic. I guarantee it. Never. That you need that authenticity loop that you've pointed out. But I try to gear it, everything in the upfront as much as possible so that whatever output we get is going to be really close, like ghostwriter close. You want to build your AI so that it functions as well as a great freelancer or ghostwriter. Even with a great freelancer or ghostwriter, what do you need to do? You need to get in there. You need to see the drafts. You need to really rip it apart if it doesn't feel right to you. So that's how I always advise people to kind of think about this, you know, in their writing.
That's right. It's got to start with you before you bring in someone else to help you. And the litmus test for me is always, would I engage the help of another human for this step? And if I would engage the help of a human, I have no problem engaging the help of an AI.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I also think you need to be radically transparent about when you're using it and when you're not using it these days. But I also agree that a couple of years from now, it's not even going to be a question. Allison, any final words of wisdom for our audience before we send them away and tell them to immediately run to Amazon and get your book? Any last words of wisdom? Last words of wisdom for everybody.
I want to impress upon those who are watching and listening that the decisions we make in the next 3 years will determine where AI goes, whether it brings us together, builds trust, whether it pushes us apart and isolates us even further. And we are writing the new rules of communication, of leadership, of human connection right now. And I don't want to let someone building an AI system decide what my future values are. I want to play an active role in deciding my values and how I interact with others. And it's critically important that everyone watching and listening realize that they have the opportunity to build the kind of future they'd like to see. Because if you don't get involved in that, someone else is going to build your future. And it may not look the way you want it to look, which is why I wrote the book, which is why I'm advising leaders, speaking to leadership teams, and going to Davos and other venues to talk about these issues, because I believe that our world is changing and we have an active role to play to make sure it changes for the better. That's why I wrote the book. And I encourage anyone to reach out to me through my website at AllisonShapira.com/AI, and they can download the resource guide from the book. And to please connect with me on LinkedIn. It's a great place to follow my work and also reach out for the messages, because I'd love to hear from them.
Well, I love what you're saying there. We absolutely are building this plane as we're flying it. But everybody is their own pilot, and whether it crashes or burns it's kind of in your hands, people. I mean, you have the tools in front of you. You can take advantage of it, but do it authentically and do it with intentionally. And don't lose your critical thinking skills. Everybody, AllisonShapira.com is the website. LinkedIn, of course, find her at Allison Shapira, and her name will be spelled properly in the episode title when we release it. YouTube, Allison Shapira. Imagine that. And Instagram at Allison Shapira. And
that's
X, Twixter, Allison Shapira. And the book, it is AI for the Authentic Leader, Allison Shapira. Grab it on Amazon, grab it wherever you get books. Get the audiobook. Do you read the audiobook, by the way? Is it you?
The audiobook, yes, I do. It is coming out. By the time this episode comes out, the audiobook will be out, and it is my voice.
Sweet. So you can listen to Allison's mellifluous tunes voice as you hear all about AI for the Authentic Leader. Allison, thank you very much. I hope you come back sometime. It's been a real pleasure.
Pleasure talking to you. Thanks for having me, Dan.